Well, let's get to the right one here. I want to apologize, start off by apologizing. I've had a lot of technical difficulties. It is so bizarre. I've never had so many problems trying to do a live stream before, and especially one that is as important as the one that I'm going to be sharing with all of you today. And so I have a guest that's going to be joining me here, and we've been sorting out some video problems. Once we're connected here, then I'm going to be able to pull him in. And we also have, and that's Igor, who'll be joining me shortly. And then Anna as well is an immigration lawyer up in Edmonton. Both are from the Ukraine, and they'll be sharing some insight, sharing some background information and some thoughts as we get everything all set up here. So yeah, we've had a few technical difficulties, but the whole purpose of this is to share insight and share a little bit of knowledge and information on what is happening. Many people have been watching the news, are very familiar with the war in Ukraine. And what a lot of people are trying to figure out right now is, what do I do to help? What can I do to help contribute? And in addition to that, there's many people that are wondering about these new announcements, once again, from the Canadian government and what they practically mean for people. So we'll go through those announcements from the Canadian immigration perspective, and we will also take some time to talk about the refugee determination process. And Anna is going to join us, in about 14 minutes or so. And so we are, once we have her on, we'll have her address some of the asylum issues with individuals from the Ukraine who are looking possibly at that as an option. But the most important thing today is that when we do this video is that we give real practical advice, not political spin, not something that it has any more fanfare than it has substance. And there are some of the things that are, when it comes to us giving direction and advice today, you're probably going to have to realize that in many respects, even if you're an individual who's fleeing Ukraine for what, in whatever country you're in, it may very well be better for you to stay there than it is to come to Canada. But we're going to talk about that. And also you Canadians and permanent residents who are looking at options and ways that you can contribute. We're going to talk about that as well. Okay, so I think I may take a shot at bringing Igor in here. I'm wondering, well, let's see if we can pull him in. It's a little rough and tumble, so I'm going to have to add him in here. He's the phantom Igor right now, but let's see if we can get him in. Okay. All right. How you doing, Igor?
Hi, everyone. I'm doing better. Yeah, better than on February 24th.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And for those of you who don't know Igor is he's a good friend, and he works in my immigration office right now. He's working hard at getting everything sorted out with school so that he can become an immigration lawyer here in Alberta. So, Igor, it's great to have you. I'm glad we're finally able to connect in. And what I thought I would do here, we have a little bit of a roadmap what we're going to go through, but you were not that long ago in the Ukraine before you came to Canada, and many family members and friends and fellow students when you were completing your law degree in the Ukraine are all still there. So I thought maybe I'd give you a little bit of time just to talk about, kind of the the background issues and what's happening right now from your perspective, and then we can slowly move into some of the practical things for people that need help and those who want to help.
Yeah, so I'll start with what will be covered in this video, and I'm sorry, I have another screen right to my right from the phone. So we'll provide you with a little background of what is happening, why it's happening. Then we'll tell you about the main issues that are connected with claiming refugee status and coming to Canada. And then we'll target specifically people who are in Canada, people outside Canada. We'll talk a little about refugee protection in Poland and share important links with instructions in Ukrainian language. And then share information how you can help the cause and how you can donate money. And then we'll definitely have Q&A section. I will also work on translation of this video to Ukrainian language because not everyone understands it. Not everyone understands English, I mean. And one of the things that I would want to start with, it's not the right way to say the Ukraine. It's Ukraine. The Ukraine was pushed by Soviet propaganda because the article the is added to some islands, some territories, and Ukraine, the word Ukraine comes from on the side. It's kind of in the side of the country. So it was historically a region that was always divided between different countries: Poland, Russia, Hungary, and many, many other countries. Ottoman Empire. And perception of Vladimir Putin is that Ukraine is still part of their bigger country, of their Russian Empire. So the war that started in 2014 eventually led to the escalation that he purposely made. And what he tries to do is he trying to take this, in his sense, territory back to the empire. So he's trying to rebuild the whole empire again. He, on many occasions, mentioned that the greatest catastrophe of 20th century is not the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, is not the Second World War, it's not the First World War, it's not the chemical weapons. In his sense, the greatest catastrophe of 20th century is collapse of the Soviet Union. And we know his biggest fear, the collapse of the empire. And so what Ukraine is standing for is standing for its independence. It's standing for freedom to live as Ukrainian people deserve to live. I read the comments on the right side, and somebody just commented it's 5:21 a.m. in Ukraine, and yes, we're sorry. If you have access to the internet, this video will be available as recording as well. So if you're unable to watch it right now, you can tune in later, but you will not be able to participate in the Q&A section. But you can always reach out to me or to Mark, to anyone else with questions, and we'll be happy to help you. Now, so yeah, let me talk a little more about the conflict in Donbass. There's a lot of backgrounds because, again, the idea of this empire was always in the mind of Putin, and there were many, many attempts to subordinate Ukraine by establishing a pro-Russian political regimes in Ukraine, by having Yanukovych in office, who destroyed the army, who deliberately reduced the funding for the army. So they were demilitarizing Ukraine. They mentioned this as their main purpose right now, but they were doing it long before the war has even started. And when we had Maidan and they occupied Crimea, annexed it, when they occupied Donbass, Ukraine was calling to the Western countries for 8 years that we're fighting not for our own independence right now, we're fighting for independence of the Western civilization from the dictatorship. And as we see right now, we're actually also fighting for the independence of Russians, because when you have a dictator sitting in the Kremlin and arresting every single person who protests, who doesn't agree to live in their in the way they live right now. Those people are getting arrested, and the atmosphere of total how would you say it? The atmosphere of total fear to stand out, coupled with intense propaganda that is being dumped into people's ears for 30 years, has resulted in 17, 18, 19-year-old guys joining the army after they graduate from high school and then being sent to Ukraine for death. And there are a lot of people who say, well, the whole world is compassionate for you because your people are dying, but you're not compassionate for our people dying. You're not compassionate for our societies suffering from sanctions. The answer to that is quite simple. We're fighting not for our own freedom, we're fighting for your freedom as well. And the sanctions is the result of not NATO invading Russia. It's the result of Putin assaulting Russia. It's a result of Putin assaulting Ukraine and Russia and every other country where Russia has had their hand on. If you take a look at Moldova, you have Transnistria. If you take a look at Ukraine, you have Crimea and Donbass. Take a look at Georgia, you have Abkhazia, Ossetia. Take a look at what happened in Kazakhstan when people stood out. You immediately had Russian troops fleeing, coming into the country and suppressing any sign of democracy. We have the same in Belarus, and unless we stop the evil right now, we'll have Belarus next, we'll have Kazakhstan, and then guess what? We'll have Baltic countries. Then I don't want to speculate because that's all just it cannot be more than speculation right now. But the speculation is well founded. That if Russia is backed by China, they will move on, and the Third World War is inevitable. We had this same scenario playing out in 1939. We had occupation and split of Czechoslovakia. We had occupation of Austria. Then we had two major powers in that time, Soviet Union and Germany, agreeing to split Poland. Where's the guarantee that that's not going to happen between Russia and China, between Russia or any other country who thinks that the country that thinks that they have their own mission in this world? So whatever is happening in Ukraine is not only Ukrainian cause, it's our common cause. And when Ukraine was calling for 8 years for for Western countries to impose any sanctions to stop this madness, we heard silence until 24th came. And the February 24th is the day that will for sure go into history. But with that day, what will definitely go into history is the courageous people of Ukraine, is the unstoppable power of our people. And it's up to West how they will go into history. Whether they will go as people who supported Ukraine. We don't ask for people to fight for Ukraine. We just ask for help. And or Western powers can go into history as countries that betrayed Ukraine. And our mission here in Canada, and yes, we are in safety, but we do whatever we can, is to make sure that the second scenario for West doesn't play out. That West will always be remembered for the help they gave to Ukraine. And there's also another party that will go into history with the events that happened. It's Vladimir Putin. And he wants to go to history as a person who reunited all of the post-Soviet countries, who built up the empire from the beginning again. But the thing is, I personally, I want him to go into history, but I want to go for him to go into history in a little bit different context. I want him to go to the history as a war criminal, because whatever is happening here is the war against humanity. It's the crimes against humanity. It's the crimes against civilians. Not to mention how many thousands of people suffer the consequences of reckless shelling of just our cities. They mentioned like we're bombing military bases, but what we see is totally a different thing. I see a comment, and it's kind of funny one. Somebody, Yuri Spivak, says, "Please say Palyanice." Yeah, that's one of the things, Mark. So Palyanice is kind of like a bread, and it has like a cut on the side. So it's a specific form. It looks specifically, and that's one of the ways how we can distinguish Ukrainian people from those who don't speak Ukrainian. And why I say it's funny and why I didn't even mention it, because what is most cynical about the situation that's happening right now is that you have people invading the country, but it's a little bit different from how it was in 1939, 1941. It's a little bit different than if, let's say, any visibly different country would invade Ukraine, because you would always see the invader. You will see the invader by the look. But now we in this situation where we have people who look the same. Yes, there's some minor difference, but we have people who were born in Ukraine, invading Ukraine. We have people who have parents and grandparents who were born in Ukraine, now invading our country. And the cynical part in this is that they use our similarities against us. They use our closeness. They use our relative relationship between each other against us. And I think this is just this thing, like the most cynical thing that you can imagine. And there's one more thing that I also want to share. And I'm sorry I have like this flow of emotions going on right now. But think about the time when the war has started. I remember I was sitting on the second floor of my building just doing my work. And then all of a sudden I see the news that Ukraine calls for Security Council meeting. It's going to start at 4:30 a.m. in Kiev time. And so I tune in. I have the live video of the Security Council meeting. Russian representative is a president of the Security Council. So he determines the agenda, he determines who's going to speak next, etc. So he takes some time to start the meeting. Again, it's 4:30 when the meeting started. So then, I think after 20 minutes of speaking, he gave the word to Antonio Guterres, the UN Security Council, oh my God. Sorry, I just forgot what's the official title. It's just crazy because I did remember it, but whatever. My mind is just functions a little bit different right now. I forget whatever I remember. And I think that's because of the stress. But so he gave the word to Antonio Guterres, he gave the word to his deputy, and then all of a sudden he gives the word to Albania, and the representative of Albania starts his speech. And then at that particular moment, another notification on my phone that Vladimir Putin is live and he's talking. And the first thought that I have is like, what this guy is doing at 5 a.m. Like why he's not sleeping. So that's probably something really important. So I immediately switched to my computer. I keep the UN Security Council running on my phone. And then on computer, I see him declaring the war. The cynical thing here, and again, I use cynical a lot, but the most cynical thing in this situation is that representatives in the Security Council were still saying, if he attacks, there will be consequences. At that time, the attack was already on, and Security Council did not know about it. And I'm sure if the meeting would be called for 3:30, not 4:30 a.m. Kiev time, he would launch his attack at 4 a.m., just like the Nazi Germany did in 1941. This coincidence of what's happening in Russia, suppression of all the media, suppression of all opposition, total lie and propaganda, um, lawless state where you have corruption, where you have open hatred towards national minorities, where you suppress Chechen people, where you suppress people in Bashkortostan, where you suppress people all over the country, Yakut people. They don't speak their language daily. Yes, they know it, but guess what language they speak daily? Mostly Russian. And this is the suppression. Like, if you have any national identity and you show it and you work for it and you fight for it, you will disappear one day. And I have friends who lost their friends and family members disappearing because of their opposition. This just resembles me, the Nazi Germany, and again brings me to the point that the war that's happening in Ukraine is not the war for Ukraine, it's the war for the world. And the world has to be responsible for their inaction during those 8 years, and the world has to take actions. So I think this is just a good introduction to what's happening and the gravity of what is happening. And I think it's a good turn point to actually talk about the actions and see whether the world and the West will be going into history as heroes who helped Ukraine, or they don't do enough. So I thank you for this opportunity, Mark, to speak up, and I pass the mic to you.
Thanks, Igor. I know we've got a little bit of feedback. I'm not sure what's happening with our mics here, but Anna's here now. So I'm going to pull Anna in, and let's just flip over here and bear with us as we add her in. Oh, it looks like I got to add both Igor and Anna in. Let's see here. So there's Igor, and we'll add Anna in here. There we go. Oh, we almost got Anna. Looks like Anna stepped aside for a minute. Now she's back. How are you, Anna? Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can hear you very well. I can see you very well. I hope that you can hear and see me.
Yes, you're clear as day. We've got a little bit of feedback problems with Igor there, but I think we're going to be just fine. So basically what Igor did was give a little background on the circumstances that really led to a climate that allowed for, I guess, in some shape or form, this to play out. And so you can maybe call it geopolitical, call it whatever you want, but Igor gave his own perspective on how we arrived at this stage that we're at right now. And so Anna, maybe you can just tell everyone just a little bit about yourself and kind of do a little bit of an introduction. And then what we're going to do is we're going to shift and we're going to talk a little bit about on the Canadian side, some of the measures that Canada is putting in place to help Ukrainian citizens both in Canada and abroad. Mm-hmm. And I specifically wanted you to come to talk about the refugee process. And, you know, there's a lot of misinformation out there about how effective it may or may not be, but we thought we'd maybe touch on that. So maybe if you could give a little introduction for yourself, that would be great.
Yes, certainly. So good evening, everybody. I live in Edmonton, Alberta, and I am an immigration lawyer. I have been practicing immigration law for the past 7 years. I work at a nonprofit organization that provides legal advice to people who meet certain definitions of low income. My practice is fairly diverse in terms of immigration cases, immigration matters, but I do a fair amount of refugee claims that are made inside Canada. And I also sometimes assist private groups that try to sponsor refugees from the outside Canada. So I have that perspective and that knowledge and understanding of what is involved in making a refugee claim from inside the country when somebody is already here, and those people who are elsewhere in the world and they are seeking out opportunities to be resettled to Canada as refugees. Um, maybe Mark and Ihor, can you give me a little bit of a very, very rapid background? Who is in our audience so that I also know how to tailor sort of my content?
So our audience is literally from everywhere. So it's a little bit early in Europe right now, obviously with the time that we're doing this. And so it's probably about 5:30, almost 6 or whatever in the Ukraine right now. So we have some people that are tuning in from overseas. We've got a number of people that are watching live right now. So there's a real broad breadth. And just to clarify here, Igor, we do have one question. Let me just see here. I'm scrolling through all of the comments here. There we go. Igor, you can respond to that one. So Roshan Nicholson says, is Igor in the Ukraine right now?
Thank you for the question. No, I am in Calgary, Alberta, but my family is in Ukraine. My wife's family is in Ukraine. So we're directly affected by what's going on. And I'm just a little worried right now because my hometown, Mykolaiv, which is right next to Kherson, is on the southern front line. And Kherson is currently supposedly occupied. Not occupied, but encircled. And I'm a little worried about how the battle goes there. But yes, the question, I am in Canada and I suffer through this syndrome of being safe and sound and not being there.
And Igor, your wife's family, where are they?
My wife's family is in Kryvyi Rih. Yeah.
And at this stage, is everybody
strike siren today, so they have to lay on the floor, hide in the bathtubs, in the cast iron bathtubs, stand between the door openings. So it's a little severe.
Is there is everybody safe right now?
The airstrike siren in Kryvyi Rih is canceled. It was launched not only in that city, but like in all major cities around it. The battle for Kherson is just unfolding right now. There was another battle in my hometown in the middle of in the center of the city, right next to the place where I used to go and jump on trampoline when I was a kid. We have 4 different tanks burned to the ground, and that people laying on the streets. So it's quite intense, and you never know if they stay safe or not, because to be sure that they're safe, you have to be 24/7 on the phone with them, but that's impossible.
All right, thanks Igor. Yes, Anna.
And probably I should add, sorry, I neglected to mention it in my introduction, that I myself also have a direct and personal connection to Ukraine. I am originally from Ukraine. I was born and raised in the city of Cherkasy. And I studied in Kiev. I lived in Kiev after my first university degree. So everything that I hear now and all the photos that I see, they just like I've never been so personally connected to anything like a war and such a dramatic and distressing turmoil. I have some distant relatives in Kiev. My very good friends live in Kiev. Thankfully, I was able to connect with them through email right now, and they periodically send me messages in between their trips to the bomb shelter. And to me, of course, from the safety in Canada, it's shocking how somebody can speak so matter-of-factly about, yeah, we go to bomb shelters 5, 6 times a day, and each time we leave, we don't know if we're going to come back and if our apartment is still going to be standing. So I am trying to process it kind of with my mind, sort of, I understand what people are telling, but emotionally and psychologically, it is very hard. And especially, as Igor mentioned, being here in our safety and kind of not facing the same reality, not feeling it viscerally, also leaves us with, sort of like survivor's guilt and just, being here and being so safe and free and taking it all for granted around us because we just never knew anything different.
Anna, do you still have family in the Ukraine?
So I have, yes, I have aunts, uncles, cousins, and so I have one family that lives right in Kyiv, and my other set of uncles and aunts live in Cherkasy. So those who are in Kyiv, so they live close to the agricultural university, and so they tell me that the university has some kind of setup where they have like more or less not completely livable conditions in the basements, but it's like once they go into the basements, they are in the university kind of below the ground, so they can stay there for long periods of time. Um, and so my family in Cherkasy, so they left to a village close by, and so they're saying that it's safer in the village right now. Um, my aunt is very concerned, very afraid. I haven't spoken to her sons, who are my cousins, and they are like in their late 20s, and of course they have conscriptable age. They all have young children. So I don't know. I haven't been able to talk to them right now and to find out how it is for them and how it is for her to know that if they go into the civil defense now, what's going to happen to the family, and whether they're going to come back, and what's going to happen to the young ones.
This is a question from Sam Dawson. He says, do you have any thoughts about the Ukrainian government, well, the restriction, all men aged 18 to 60 leaving the country currently? Do either of you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I guess, from my perspective, oh, sorry, go ahead, Igor.
I'm sorry, Anna, my internet connection is just a little weird right now, so I didn't hear you start talking, so I'll talk after you.
Oh, okay. Well, it just, like my thoughts were that, now the Ukrainian government is like, it's a valid government, right? So what they're doing, these are like valid, lawful measures, and it's absolutely appropriate, like it's legal, it's morally supportable, understandable that the country would want to defend itself. And so it just how it goes that, who are the primary defenders of the country in the situations of such turmoil. These are men of this age when they're capable to be physically out there and kind of to have like the stamina and the strength to defend the country. So, personally, I guess I don't have any kind of words of criticism or condemnation towards the Ukrainian government. It would be different if, for example, like we had precedents in the past where, like what happened in Iraq, what happened in Syria, where the Syrian government was implementing violent and forceful measures against its own population, where the West stood up, and so the actions towards its people by the government were not recognized, were not condemned. So I think that here, like, it's a very, very different case, and we cannot criticize the Ukrainian government with what they're doing. Probably, like if I were sort of a part of, like among the decision makers there to decide whether this ban should apply universally to everybody, I would possibly, try to carve out maybe exceptions for those that have families, that have children, that are like, let's say if there's a male, 25-year-old man, and he's the only child in the family, and I believe somehow it rings a bell that at some point somewhere, I think it used to be in Ukraine, that those were exempt from military service if they fell under those circumstances. So yeah, like if they were the only son in the family, if they already had family of their own with young children, so they were exempt from military service. So I would, like, if I had this power of decision making on that level, this would be the exemptions that I would carve out.
Yeah. And the reality is the government had maybe a day, 2 days to make a decision, right? And so, Igor, what are your thoughts on that question?
My thoughts are supported with numbers. When we had elections and President Zelensky was elected by 73% of people, that never happened in our history before. Now with the actions that he does, we have an infographics that is spread around the whole internet, and you can see by the actions that he does how our country gets united. 91% supports his actions. I'm not sure exactly how accurate is the saying that 9% don't support it, but what I see across the whole country is that This war united our society in such way that we were never united before. And when people come with weapons and shoot civilians, shoot your relatives, shoot your families and military, I think morally we don't have any right to be silent and not to do the best we can. While I cannot fight in Ukraine because I'm here, I do the best I can here in Canada, and I think every single person has to do their own part in making this victory closer to us. And again, it's interesting how these situations and this exact war is similar to the context of what was happening during 1941-45. Back then, we used to have a great patriotic war. It's called this way not by mistake, not by coincidence. It's called this way because every single person was contributing to the victory, because unless you do, you will be either repressed or killed or evicted and moved to the other country, or God knows what. And this is exactly the situation where every single person has to do something. You have 5 hryvnias, which is like, I don't know, 20 cents. Donate 5 hryvnias. You have 2 arms, 2 hands, 2 legs, 2 feet. Go and fight. If you have your relatives who, like my dad, he has his grandma, so he has to stay with her, do whatever you can. Maybe, I don't know, maybe donate empty glass bottles so that people can make Molotov cocktails. Whatever you can. This is the war for the humanity again, because we're dealing with a nuclear power. And unless we win right now, we'll face more severe consequences in the future. Mark, it looks like you're muted.
Sorry, guys. I was trying to counteract any echo that was maybe coming from you, Igor. Thanks for identifying that. Yeah, so we could see here, Yaroslavna. I think Yaroslavna might be in Manitoba. I can't remember, but she's kind of been following, and look, we've got someone else here. Igor says he's from there as well. Did you see that? So it's interesting to see, who's watching, and lots of people are definitely praying for everybody in your families and those that are in Ukraine. So, yeah, that's great. Okay. I'll pull up a few other comments, I'm sure. And Igor's responding here, I guess, yourself here. So, okay. All right, let's jump in, maybe, Anna, to just a few things that the government has been doing. So Yaroslavna says that she heard today, meeting with UCC and with Minister Fraser, that those Ukrainians who are in Canada on visitor visas may get an authorization to work. Do you have any info on that yet? And I think we can probably, let's see if I can get the right one. I'm going to have to add you guys both back in here so that I've got you. But just give me 1 second. This is one of the challenges we have when we're trying to get things set up here on the fly, and people are jumping in just a little bit later. But the government of Canada has made some announcements to help facilitate people that are in Canada right now, and the measures that they have instituted. I'm just going to pull up these additional ones, because this is really where they highlight this package of new immigration measures, which I think is what Yaroslavna is referring to, Anna. And obviously they have the
Mark,
dedicated
are you
line.
looking at the page that says additional measures? Because the open work permits are referenced under that additional immigration support. Or if you want, I can drop you the link.
Yeah. So this one right here. So this is some of the background kind of information, and then the additional measures is, I think, this one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So this one talks about open work permits. Yeah. So the government has said so far that anybody who is in Canada and anybody who is here as a visitor, worker, student, so they will receive open work permits. And the government also said they will waive the fees for the work permits retroactive to last week.
We'll make sure that we put this link, if people haven't seen it, we'll make sure that we put this link in the description of this video following our presentation tonight. But yeah, these measures and the ability for individuals to, who are here, and this is the indication right here of the issuance of open work permits. And the big thing here is even visitors. So if I was in Canada right now, Anna, and I was here as a visitor, what would your advice be if status was running out and you really had no mechanism for going home, even if you wanted to right now? What are some of the options that some of these measures provide to an individual who's here as a visitor?
Well, right now, so if somebody is in the position to work, because I also understand that it can be quite expensive just to sort of hang around Canada as a visitor because of the cost of living and relative to the resources with which people come here from Ukraine as visitors. So if they were to stay here for a long period of time, so they need to be able to work, and of course they need to be able to work without fear of legal consequences for unauthorized work. So anybody who is a visitor, so we are still not clear right now what the application mechanism will be. I am hoping it's going to be online, like there would be an easy option to do it online. There is already an online mechanism to apply for work permits for people who are in Canada. And I don't know at this point whether it would be the same online work permit application process, or RC would institute something else, and if they would want Ukrainian applicants to submit any additional information through the web form. So this is all evolving very quickly, and we are hoping that within the next couple of days, it's going to be very clear how somebody who is in Canada right now with a visitor status, so they can get their forms, fill them out, scan whatever necessary documents, and apply online.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to just actually, that last comment that we had from Yaroslavna, she mentions a meeting with UCC, and I did want to pull this up as well. Once again, make sure I've got the right screen here, and let's see. Apparently, I've got a message from my mother. You got to love the live. But this right here, I wanted to just highlight. And I'm not sure, Anna, if you've had any interaction with these individuals who are trying to put together within the Ukrainian Canadian Congress some resources in addition, to what obviously within the Canadian Bar Association we're going to be trying to put together some resources to help individuals that are here in Canada. But this is one thing that was brought to my attention that I wanted to let people know about. Was the series of webinars and Q&As that have been put together by Canadian lawyers and legal practitioners to support Ukrainians. And so I'm not sure if you've seen this, but they've got a series of I think they even did one, they did one on Monday today, and then they've got another session tomorrow. And so all you need to do is go to the Facebook page for Ukraine. It's this humanitarian appeal. It's UCC National and the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. So I'd encourage people, and we'll also put a link here as well. And maybe I'll be able to get someone on who's kind of spearheading that as well. I know the wheels of the CBA move slowly, don't they, Anna? So we'll see what within our membership as well, what we can do to provide some assistance to people who are seeking to take advantage of these additional measures that the government has laid out. So
yeah, Mark, and I can speak briefly about this initiative that is kind of brewing and getting forged within the Canadian Bar Association. So there are about 15 lawyers so far that have come forward, and we are going to have our introductory meeting on Wednesday morning through Zoom, and then we'll hopefully by that time we'll have more clarity and more concrete information from the government about like these practical things. Yeah, like how would somebody apply for an open work permit right now? What if somebody's passport has just expired, and clearly for the Ukrainian consulates in Canada, it's not going to be a priority right now to renew somebody's passports. And so the purpose of the meeting on Wednesday within this volunteer group would be to figure out like how we can start assisting, providing legal information, legal advice, like right away. So we might set up a dedicated web page through the Canadian Bar Association with our contact information. And so then those who are affected by the current turmoil in Ukraine can contact these lawyers. The lawyers would determine to what extent they can provide free assistance. So, for example, somebody might have capacity to take on like an actual like case to do an application. Somebody might be available only to provide free consultations. Um, yeah, so this is what we will discuss, and then we'll mobilize Canadian Bar Association, sort of their IT infrastructure to get the word out and make the information about our initiative easily accessible on the web.
You bet. So stay tuned for that, everyone. I also want to just highlight for those of you who are looking for somewhere you can call right now, the Government of Canada has set up, whether you're in Canada or abroad, this number 613-321-4243, and collect calls are accepted. Now, I've also understand that I have to imagine at this stage, all of our cellular providers are offering, no cost long distance calls to Ukraine. So that has been set up. But in addition, if you have inquiries, you can also, they've provided this keyword, Ukraine 2022, you can go to IRCC's web form. And I'm just going to open that up and just show people right here. And you can see they've had this right at the front now of, make sure that everybody can see my screen. Yeah, they can. Right at the front is the instructions here in case you have questions. And, Anna, just last week we had a meeting with the Canadian Bar Association, and one of the lead individuals responsible for the client support and communication and transparency and everything, and they were slammed before, and then all of this happened, and they were just slowly digging their way out, and now they're right back into it. And so understand that when you send inquiries into the government, you're not going to get immediate responses. And so sometimes sitting on a phone forever and ever, hoping that the number you're going to be able to get through, sometimes that will work. But in other cases, you may wish to go and use this web form. And you're basically, just follow the instructions. I won't go into any detail, any extensive detail, but remember to use the keyword Ukraine 2022 in the inquiry box. And you can't miss it. It's the only one that really has a lot of free-form text available. And you can get your inquiry triaged up to the front of the queue. If you don't put it in there, well, I think they're dealing with about 15 days or 16 days responses with regular web form inquiries. So I just wanted to let
Mark, and I'll just mention, Mark, I'll just mention through
Please.
our listserv on CBA, because I'm trying to monitor it too to see what communication is transpiring in relation to Ukraine. So one of our members has shared through the listserv that when she contacted RSCC through this web forum using the Ukraine 2022 keyword regarding her spousal sponsorship application involving a Ukrainian national, she got a response from a living person there on the other side of the web form within 2 days.
2 days.
Which, of course, for you and me, we know it's like almost like from the realm of science fiction that RCC would be responding so quickly within 2 days with any meaningful information. So I am very hopeful that it's not like a one-off situation, that this is how they see the standard target times to process to these to respond to these queries, because it's really an exigent situation and people do need answers really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I'm just going to post a few more questions here, and we've talked a little bit about what you can do if you're in Canada as a Ukrainian national. We'll touch on some of the things that we're seeing outside, and maybe Igor can give us a little bit more of a background as to what's happening with people right now. Obviously, we know that the restrictions are in place for men of essentially fighting age, and many people are streaming to the West. But I'll just post a few other comments here you might find interesting. I know Igor will like these. So it's a peace-loving nation, Craig says, but don't back them into a corner or you will regret it. All right. Let's see. MK says, Doug Ford said, we have work for Ukraine refugees in Ontario. I know other premiers across Canada have also expressed, support in whatever way. MJ says, watching from Lethbridge. All right, my hometown. We've got relatives in Ukraine, trying to gather as much information as possible. And that's, one thing I will give this modern technology and the way the world is now, the ability, like Igor, you're in fairly constant contact with your father and with your family and with Tatiana's family as well. And it's hard to imagine, when we think back to the horrible world wars in the past, where you had no contact, you had no clue how your family was. And it's been, amazing that those connections are still there. So, so that's a very, very positive. Okay. Here's a question from Craig. So Craig says, what's the best way to apply for visas for my family who are in the Ukraine? And this is a good segue. I have my permanent residency. Thanks. So maybe Anna, did you, this is a little bit of a segue and Igor, we can definitely shift back and talk about what's happening on the ground with people. But Anna, do you have some thoughts for Craig here before we dive too much?
So I can share based on the basis of like what we know so far. So the Canadian government has not announced like a special dedicated channel for visa applications out of Ukraine yet. We know that the visa application centers in Kyiv and Lviv have been closed right now, and sort of and some current immigration files have been transferred to other visa offices, such as in London. This is what I'm learning from our CBA listserv too. So until we hear otherwise, like I would say that you just go to the RCC website right now and just follow the instructions about how to apply for a visitor visa, and then you will get a drop down menu, and then you select your country, and then you basically follow the instructions. I do have a lot of questions towards the Canadian government about how these visa applications from Ukrainian nationals are going to be processed. One critical point, and which is a legal point under the Canadian immigration law, is that anybody who applies to come to Canada as a visitor must demonstrate so-called temporary intent, right? So in their application, so they have to provide documents, explanations, and any evidence to signal to the processing officers that I'm coming as a visitor. I'm going to come, I'm going to stay for my 3 months, 6 months. I have enough money to support myself. Somebody's going to be also providing me with practical help and accommodation and things like that. And then I'm going to leave because I have ties to my home country. This is kind of how these applications get approved. This is how they're assessed. Conversely, visitor applications are most often refused on the basis that applicants just don't provide enough evidence, and they don't persuade decision makers that they have somebody or something to go back to their home country at the end of their visitor stay. So, of course, with the situation in Ukraine right now, as volatile and fast evolving or devolving it would be extremely difficult for anybody on their visitor application to say that, yes, the purpose of my the duration of my intended visit is 3 months or 4 months, and then I have property in Ukraine, I have a job, and I have family, and I'm for sure going to go back to my country at the end of my temporary stay in Canada. So what I would like our government to do is to waive this requirement of temporary intent, that anybody who applies for a visitor visa to come to Canada, they should be basically assessed without having regard to, well, does the person have ties to Ukraine? Are they likely to go back? Because to me, it's a huge legal roadblock.
And Craig followed up by saying, what are the documents needed? Well, like Anna said, we will be in a position shortly where we can give a little bit more instruction. But if you go to the Government of Canada website and you just search visitor visa, how to apply, you'll arrive here. And the instructions on how to move forward are all here. And there's information on basically on the documentation and everything that you need to do to submit those applications. So
yeah, I would probably, so in response to
And,
Craig's question, oh, sorry, go ahead, Igor.
yes.
oh, sorry. Again, my internet is lagging. So when I hear you stop talking, I speak, and then all of a sudden you start speaking as well. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to make a little note in this regard that there are many people who are in Ukraine and they still ask how they can apply for visa from Ukraine. And I think we have an unfortunate news that unfortunately that's not possible because like those visa offices are closed. And so they have to be outside of Ukraine to apply for those visas and send documents to other visa offices, not the one in Kiev because it's closed, not the one in Lviv because it's not doing anything
Yeah,
right
sorry,
now.
Igor, I would just add a point to that. Like, I'm not sure, like, what is the source of this information? Because my understanding is that the applications are online, right? And normally, the initial application goes to to this visa application center, which is kind of like an agent for the Canadian government to process the applications, collect documents, and send them off to visa offices. So
Yeah,
even though those
the
visa
problem is,
application centers are closed in Ukraine, in theory, because the process is online, right? So in theory, then even those who
yes,
are in
but they
Ukraine
still
should
have to
be
get
able.
the counterfoil, right?
Yeah. So, but like it is possible. Well, to like, for example, even like to send in the passports, and but now what the government is announcing, like facilitative measures, so we don't know exactly yet, but I'm hoping that they're going to put in place some sort of eased version of receiving passports, or maybe even issuing secure documents that could be communicated to the clients electronically without having to go through the actual kind of, like steps of like getting somebody to travel somewhere in person to submit their passport.
Yeah, because this was what I was really worried about. Like to get the actual visa in the passport, you have to send it somewhere, but there's nowhere to send it in Ukraine. And to collect it in person, it's like unless we have more news coming from Canadian government on the actual process, it's just
Yeah, and then at this point I just don't know, like for example, how even like mailing infrastructure, to what extent it's disrupted in Ukraine. So if somebody is, let's say, in Kyiv or Cherkasy, can they, like in like relatively quiet hours, can they go to the postal office to send in like their passport for registered mail? Is that even possible? I just don't have that information right now. Yeah.
yeah, and it's also another factor that I really think a lot of people are interested is what if they are outside of Ukraine? Can they still apply for visas from outside of Ukraine normally, under normal circumstances? Anamar, can you tackle that also?
Sorry, Igor. Sorry, what was that?
Yeah, my question was, if the person with Ukrainian passport is outside of Ukraine, can that person apply for visa to the foreign Canadian visa office in Poland, let's say?
Yeah, if they're like any time that you're in any country and you've been lawfully admitted to that country, you're eligible to submit an application in that country, a temporary resident application. So there's no issues, no restrictions. Even if you start an application, like Anna said, you start the application online in in Ukraine, and then you end up leaving, you're able to leave, that application will continue forward, and you do have the ability to then to notify them in the event it reaches a stage where they're, if they haven't waived the visa, that counterfoil requirement in the passport, you do have the ability to notify them that now you're in a different country and have that taken care of there. It gets a little cumbersome, but you do have the ability to do that for sure.
Yeah, and again, and so here, like this is what I'm really hoping that the Canadian government is prepared to do to waive the obstacle of not having a valid status in a third country, because normally, as Mark pointed out, you can apply for from any country in the world, so long as you have been lawfully admitted there. So if somebody has just entered, let's say, Poland through a land border, and they don't have any status in Poland, so under normal quote unquote circumstances, that would be a hurdle for Canadian immigration, because kind of the thinking is that if you are somewhere else now without a legal status, and you are, again, sort of, quote unquote, you are violating that country's immigration laws, so quite likely you're going to do the same here. And a lot of visitor visas historically have been refused where people applied from countries where they do not have a valid legal status. And so here I'm really hoping that our government will take this into consideration and will not hold it against any Ukrainian national who fled Ukraine now, and they just did not have the time, the opportunity, the resources, kind of the whatever formal channels to regularize their status in that safe third country, like wherever they can sort of take a breather right now and be safe.
Craig just asked what that number was in Ottawa, and this number is available. It's right there, 613-321-4243 if you have any questions. And so that's the direct line, and it's a collect call. So they will accept the charges from wherever you are calling from. So definitely take a look at that. Okay. Let's just shift back here, and we'll just get to a few more questions here, a few more comments. Let's see here. Okay, so Julia says, and this is one of the hard parts because there's so much misinformation sometimes that's passed around. And so Julia says, I've seen in the news today that all you need is a passport for refugees from Ukraine. Is it true? And I think what she means is all you need is to have a passport. You can come to Canada and claim refugee status. So maybe this is a nice segue, Anna, for you to maybe just touch on this whole concept of claiming refugee status in Canada. And we know Canada is one of the world's most generous and open countries when it comes to the intention to receive refugees, and that our borders are open. But in practicality, what does that mean for someone? And we deliberately put that in the title because that's one of the questions that is being asked instantly. Can I claim refugee status in Canada if I flee Ukraine and I manage to find myself on Canadian shores? Can I claim refugee status, and what does that mean? And so maybe you could just touch a little bit on that, Anna, as we kind of get to the tail end of our video here.
Yeah. So would you like me to touch on making refugee claims inside Canada or outside Canada?
Well, you know what? Let's start inside. Okay, because I think, and then we'll shift to outside. We'll follow the same pattern as the temporary options.
Yeah. So as much as Canada has this very sort of like noble and glorious reputation around the world that we are welcoming refugees and we are just like a very compassionate and a very generous society, the Canadian refugee system is very dense with rules, restrictions, definitions, who is a refugee, what persecution means, what state protection is from your home country. So for anybody to receive the status of a refugee, so they must fit within these definitions. And sort of like one of the downsides to that is that certain situations in the world, certain types of crisis, turmoil, wars, do not necessarily allow to meet the refugee definition, no matter how difficult, how life-threatening those situations are. And so one such example is enduring of having fled like a situation of a civil conflict or a civil war in a country. So just because you as a member of a population in general have been affected and you fled the country, that does not, and let's say you found your way into Canada and you try to make a refugee claim in Canada because there is such a widespread conflict and war happening in your country, even though, of course, there is risk to your life and safety, but that does not fall within the definition of a refugee. And so therefore, a refugee claim cannot be approved. Generally, a refugee under the Canadian legal definition is somebody who is fleeing persecution on one of the enumerated grounds. They're called refugee convention grounds, such as political opinion, ethnicity, religion, membership in a social group, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some
Yes. Yeah.
category, but they're really kind of compartmentalized. They're defined. So unless a person that made their way from Ukraine into Canada, and they can make a connection between the likely persecution, risk to their life, and one of these grounds. So, for example, a political dissident, um, or like a member of the media, a human rights activist who is afraid that they are going to be facing persecution in their country, and the like police and other protecting authorities in the country cannot protect them, so then they can succeed. But again, if somebody is just like, I'm not trying to minimize or trivialize the
Yeah.
situation,
Yeah.
because it is very tragic and it is really a matter of life and death. But again, just under the confines of our refugee law, you have to make a connection between your circumstance, your fear, the threat to your life and safety, and one of these enumerated grounds. So in theory, it is possible for the Canadian government to issue a public policy to waive this requirement. And there have been precedents in the past where nationals who fled certain countries, I can't remember now which nations would have been specifically, but there's a legal mechanism for the Canadian government to recognize anybody, let's say, who flees now from Ukraine as de facto refugees. So they don't have to go into the pains of demonstrating how their circumstance relates to like a political opinion or religion or membership in a social group. So they left the country. The country is in such a state of turmoil, and everything is turned upside down, and people are literally fearing for their life on every waking hour. So that should be good enough. So they are de facto refugees, and let's recognize them as refugees and let's give them the protection. So that's in my ideal world what the government should do.
Yeah.
Whether they will do it, whether they will put in place like these legal exemptions and waivers and issue appropriate policies, it remains to be seen.
So MK says, my friend is in Kiev. Is it possible for him to save his wife and son, and I think send them to Canada, and after we win, reunite the family in Canada? And, obviously there's a lot of pieces to this, Anna, this question that's been asked here. And so, like we've discussed, there's probably more questions right now than answers in terms of how one would expedite an application for family members, a wife and son, to be able to travel to Canada, and then ultimately reuniting with them in Canada after the war is over. Well, that there's a lot of moving parts to that, and
Mark, so maybe if I could use this as example from this guest MK, to dissect it and analyze it in terms of is this family likely to receive refugee status from outside of Canada? So remember how I said that the Canadian refugee system has lots of rules, restrictions. So one of the kind of black letter of the law rules for refugees is that you have to be outside of your country of nationality, or like you don't have a country of nationality, the like country of your habitual residence. So anybody who is right now still in Ukraine, so by the very definition of the refugee in the Canadian law, they can't receive the refugee status because they have to be outside of the country. So that's kind of number one hurdle. Once they leave the country, let's say they flee to like one of the Baltic states, or they go to like Romania, Poland. So that's not sufficient yet. So you have to receive. So generally, how it works, that Canada approves refugees through resettlement once those refugees have been referred to the Canadian government by large refugee assisting entities, and the largest of them in the world is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. So most of the refugees that get resettled to Canada from like troubled parts of the world, like Middle East, like certain African countries, so they would have registered with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. in whatever third country they have found refuge. And unfortunately, the process is very cumbersome. It's extremely protracted, like it takes years. So they register, they receive the refugee status, and so then with that refugee status, they get, like, I don't know, like how exactly this sort of like exchange of information works between UNHCR and the Canadian government, and who kind of notifies their each other first. But the Canadian government has a quota for this many refugees to be resettled per year, so they get information from UNHCR that this is a number of people who are kind of ready to go, so to speak. They have been assessed, they have been given the refugee status, they have proof of that status, and now, so you, Canada, you take them. So for anybody right now from Ukraine, let's say they flee Ukraine, they are in Poland, Romania, Moldova. So like at this point, we don't know yet like how they would come on the radar of the Canadian government, because they have to be referred by a large refugee assisting entity. I don't even know if there is like a fast sort of functioning refugee like office of the UNHCR in any of these countries. Um, because traditionally, kind of, these countries are not the countries that have seen a lot of like receipt of refugees, right? So it's not like, for example, Turkey, where there is a UNHCR office, because Turkey is has been a target for the refugee migration for many decades, right? From countries like from Libya to Yemen to Iraq to Syria. So conversely, in Poland, we have not seen that much exodus of from the neighboring countries, right? Like to flee to Poland. So I don't know. I don't even know that if these countries right now have an existing infrastructure to process refugees and to issue refugee status. So something else that the Canadian government can do, in theory, again, issue legal exemptions to recognize that there are people displaced from Ukraine, that they have not registered anywhere as refugees. They don't have the refugee status, but well, they are Ukrainian nationals. They have fled the conflict, so they should be able to make themselves known to the Canadian government, right? And then that sort of portion of the red tape would be cut.
Yeah.
Remains to be seen.
It sure does. It sure does. Well, Igor, I know our time is quickly running, escaping. And so maybe let's just shift gears just for a second. I know a lot of us with access to Twitter and a wide variety of communication tools, Telegram, etc. We've been given a pretty blow by blow sometimes of people in their attempts to escape Ukraine and to travel into Poland and countries beyond. And generally speaking, the borders do allow, obviously, Ukrainian citizens to travel outside, but we know that there are massive lineups. It's not like people just stream across the border without any assessment or any establishment of identity and things like that. So what have you heard about that for people who are trying to make their way, and do you have any thoughts or suggestions for them?
So I wanted in that context talk about people who flee the country into Poland. Just the background of what's happening. There are a lot of volunteers who meet people at the train station in Lviv. They transport people for free to the border with Poland. And then as you cross the border with Poland, there was a question whether you can only have a passport. To answer that question, I would ask you, Mark, to open one of the links. I think I sent it to you in Teams. It's pomoc.pravna.org. So as we share the screen, there's information in Ukrainian language, but I'll translate it into English. If you can show it on the screen, that would be helpful for those people who have trouble understanding English.
I am in the process of waiting for
enter Poland.
Good old Teams to open up here. Just give me a second, Igor, and I'll grab that link. Okay. Yeah. Oh, Microsoft. Not my friend.
I don't know if you have messages open on computer. I can send you the link over there.
Yeah, I've got it here. So let me switch over to the view. Is this the page, Igor?
Yep, and then keep scrolling. I'll tell you where to stop. Yep, keep scrolling. Okay, so you can stop here.
Okay.
So I'll be reading from my screen. So you can enter Poland based on visa-free regime. If you have biometric passport, you can enter if you have visa D or Schengen C visa. If you have mark D or C, or you have any other travel document issued by a Schengen country, if you have a permit for temporary residence or permanent residence, or you have a what they call Rezydentstwo Unii Europejskiej, that is that is the European Union resident card, or a valid permanent resident card, Karta Pobytu. Then you can enter Poland if you have an application for international protection that you apply for at the border. So when you get to the border, you can submit that application, or if you have an agreement, like an approval from the officer of the border service when you cross the border. And then the next paragraph that is depicted on the screen right now is documents that you need to enter Poland. Due to the war in Ukraine, all foreign nationals, especially from Ukraine, can evacuate from the territory of Ukraine using one of the documents that serve as an ID, which is passport, even if it's expired. You do not need to have visa. You can use the ID card, which is the internal passport, like the national passport, even if that ID card is expired. You can also use a birth certificate for your child. And then using these documents, you can identify yourself. It's recommended that you have any other documents that can identify yourself. And then you do not need to have any COVID test, which is quite good given the context we live in. Then you can also, I think, apply for refugee protection in Poland with the Unhcr. But I'm not an expert in this matter, and I think Anna would be a good contact, right? Because I just don't want to say something that is not true or inaccurate. But what I can say for sure is that, again, documents that you can use to, so when you enter Poland and you ask for refugee protection there, so you will receive documents such as the Geneva travel document, which will be valid for 2 years. You can then replace the document in a urząd. Urząd is a, think about it as an immigration administration in Poland. Then you can receive, afterwards, you can receive a Polish travel document, which will be valid for 1 year. It will be given to you by voivoda. Voivoda is, again, think about him as a head of the urząd in Poland. So he's one of the chief officers who will approve the document. If like this Polish travel document will be given to you only if you are unable to get passports of your country, but you have to prove it. And then afterwards, like in the perspective, you can get a temporary resident card on the basis that you are a refugee. This temporary resident card will be given to you for 3 years. And the card for additional protection will be given to you for 2 years after 5 years of being in the status of the refugee in Poland. So after 5 years, you may get a permanent resident document, and they will open up the pathway for you to get a permanent resident document in Poland, and then from that you can even transition to citizenship eventually. Now, what you need to know when you cross the border with Poland. So apply for ask volunteers. There will be tons of volunteers at the border. Ask them about the refugee protection status in Poland. They will direct you to the responsible person and give you more information. But what you have to know about what you need, a lot of people are wondering about the money. So does it cost anything? Like, will they need to have money? And how it's going to go. So foreign nationals who receive a refugee status in Poland and additional protection can use that protection and help that will be given to them for 12 months in accordance with so-called Individual Integration Program, IPI. While your application is being reviewed, you will receive either a housing and food so that you can maintain like in camp for refugees, or you can abandon your option to stay in a camp. And if you do that, you will be given an allowance, which will be given to you for the duration of this individual integration program, which lasts 12 months. You will be receiving a allowance from 721 zloty to 1450 zloty per month. That money will need to be used to find housing and to purchase food for yourself. But the amount that you will eventually receive will be determined individually. For the first 6 months after you cross the border with Poland, you are not authorized to work. And only then, after 6 months, since you applied for refugee status, you will be allowed to work on the same legal grounds as the citizens of Poland. So you may be able to sign a umowę o pracy, which is a work, kind of like a work job offer that allows you medical protection, and you will be an employee. There's also another type of work permit that they have. It's not umowę o pracę, it's umowę zlecenia. Umowa zlecenia is more like, think about it as a contractor. So you will not be given this medical protection, medical insurance, work labor insurance. So you don't have too many rights, and your technically employer who signs a contractor agreement with you can fire you at any day. With umowa o pracy, which you will be eligible for after 6 months of being in Poland, you will not be fired the next day. So it's a huge benefit. And then again, so the protection and help with this individual integration program will be afforded to you based on the application that you submit to the starosta through Powiatowy Centrum Pomocy Rodzinom. That is the regional center for help to families. Within 60 days after you receive the status of refugee. I will share additional resources with people, and you may find links to them. They will be in Ukrainian language. You may find links to those resources in the description under this video. One of the really helpful resource that you will have to read if you want to apply for refugee protection in Poland is on the pomocprawna.org. It's in Ukrainian, so most of our Ukrainian speaking people will be able to understand it. In that resource, you will see the address of reception centers across Poland. You will see specific address. So when you come there and ask for help, they will direct you to the person who can give you more information. There are a lot of pro bono help right now taking place in Poland. My mom lives in Poland right now, and she just informed me of the crazy amount of help that Polish people provide to Ukrainians. And And yes, that's pretty much it. And I'm sorry, I was talking, and then suddenly I'm like, oh, that's it. But that's not it. If I find any other information, again, every link will be posted in the description. So feel free to click on all of those or reach out to any of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have, I know there's a couple more questions. We'll finish off with a couple last questions, and then we'll wrap it up. We're definitely into overtime here. So I'm going to start with this one, and I think we'll pull Anna back in here. So this one is from Yaroslavna, and she says, could you please briefly explain about sponsorship refugee? So in the context of the war in Ukraine, would it be possible? Yes, I'm from Winnipeg, originally from Ukraine. My mom is there now. So obviously there's, I think, whether it's group of 5 or those kinds of things, Anna, maybe you can just briefly touch on that, because some people are wondering, is there something that I can do directly, above and beyond? And actually there was another comment here that I'll kind of combine both of these if I can find it. Just give me 1 second here. This was from Izzy, and she says, I'm from Edmonton. Thanks for the live chat. Is there something we can do here in YEG in addition to donating to humanitarian aid organizations? And I think that's a question that a lot of people are asking. And so maybe I'll just let that kind of segue into that, Anna.
Yeah, so I can speak about, so private sponsorship. So remember how I first said that a very common route for refugee resettlement is when the Canadian government takes charge and they receive these referrals from UNHCR or other large refugee recognizing entity in the third country. It is also possible for permanent residents and Canadian citizens in Canada to sponsor refugee privately, so they don't have to wait until like Canadian government learns about these refugees and brings them to Canada. However, the same basic legal rules apply, which means that the person to be sponsored must be outside of Ukraine, and they must have the recognized refugee status in the country where they're right now residing. The only exception to this second requirement is if the individual or the family here in Canada, if they go through so-called sponsorship agreement holders. So it's a type of private refugee sponsorship where there's a large organization. Usually they are like big religious entities like churches. And so they have a long-standing relationships with the government where they have been sponsoring already refugees for many decades. And so there, the government recognizes that participation is already enough, where a formal recognition of the refugee status is not required. The list of the sponsorship agreement holders is on the RCC's website, and once I'm finished talking, I'll share the link. And so maybe Mark, you can share this link with our audience. Other than that, there's such a route called Group of 5. So any 5 adults in Canada who are citizens, who are permanent residents, they don't have to be related by blood to each other. They don't have to be related to the person whom they are wanting to sponsor. So they can band together, pull the financial resources, put together a settlement plan, and they can sponsor a refugee. But there again, we go back to these basic fundamental rules that the refugee must be outside of Canada and they must be recognized as a refugee in a third country outside of Canada. So one of my expectations, maybe it's very ambitious to say expectations, but one of my hopes for the government's response to the escalating crisis in Ukraine is that they would waive the requirement of a formal refugee status for Ukrainian nationals who have fled. We have a precedent for that. It happened in 2015 when the Canadian government managed to resettle a massive number of Syrian refugees within a very short period of time. I believe there were about 25,000 of Syrian refugees resettled through government referred channels and through private sponsorship, but in the course of less than half a year.
Yeah.
And so there it was possible to a large extent because at that time the government issued a temporary public policy to waive the requirement of a formal refugee status for those Syrians who had fled Syria. And so, like I said, the president has been said, so we know legally it is possible. Whether the government is going to do it or not, it remains to be seen. I understand that whenever this policy comes up for other situations of crisis, conflict in the world, the Canadian government is pretty cautious and they're afraid of the floodgate. Yeah, that once we kind of waive the requirement, there is just going to be this massive number of claims and applications, and we'll be just deluged and we'll just drown in this whole process. So we cannot do that. We have to find another way to kind of have sort of the levers against this possible floodgate.
Yeah. I'll finish off with one question. This was an important one. This individual says, Mr. Rezada says, I am a recent PR, February the 24th. So very, very fresh permanent resident of Canada. How can I help? And, I'm going to leave that as the last open question. And we've kind of danced around a lot of different things that people can do, but maybe Igor, let's start with you. And maybe you can share your thoughts on ways that you think Canadian citizens and permanent residents can best help and contribute to the cause, to helping in whatever way you think might be best. What do you think?
So there are several ways how you can help. Okay, I'll start with the easiest one. So the easiest way, if you, let's say, have financial issues, what you can do, you can share the truth about what's happening in Ukraine. That's the minimum. You can share it through social media. You can share it by texting your friends. You need to tell people what's happening in Ukraine, that it's not just the war against the military, it's the war against the country with its civilians, people. And then the next best thing you can do is, if you have friends in Russia, and again, I don't want to call for some unlawful actions, but you have to explain that just by protesting in Moscow and St. Petersburg, nothing's going to change, because protests don't help. But protests where you don't allow to arrest and detain people who don't break the law will. Think about it in a way that you can. It's a very broad explanation of what you have to do other than protest, but I just cannot be more specific, unfortunately. It's going to be politically incorrect, but I hope people understand what I mean. The next best thing you can do is organize a donation with either volunteers or your friends who are in neighboring countries with Ukraine, such as Romania, Moldova, Slovakia, Hungary, or Poland. Send them money so they can buy equipment, either medical or humanitarian equipment, or even food that doesn't waste, like a touristic food, those what you call it, like not pre-cooked, but dehydrated food. This will be of great help for people who are stuck in Ukraine in a war zone. The next best thing you can do is donate money to savelife.in.ua. You have the link in the description under this video. This is a well-respected charitable fund that was founded in 2014, and since then has accepted donations. Now, that fund is donating money to Ukrainian army and to volunteers. One of the other ways you can help is by sending money to Red Cross, but in my personal opinion, and again, I don't urge you to follow it, sending money to Red Cross, either in Ukraine, would be problematic right now because of the martial law that we have. sending money to Red Cross in your home country will be helpful, but it's going to be a little slow compared to if you send money directly to the volunteers or to Save Life in UA. And then finally, I had something else in mind, but again, my memory just doesn't function properly. And
well, I'm gonna pull this up. I was able to. This one that you've recommended is not, obviously it's one that.
Yeah. So when you click on this link, Mark, it should Mark in your search bar. So you can see there's HTTPS and then semicolon and then 2 slashes. Yes. Okay. Yes, exactly. So this is the website. You have the link for it in a description. Just click on that link. It will take you straight here. And then, okay, and now I remember it. Again, my mind is just doesn't function properly. But what else you can do, if you are in Canada, Mr. Rasaida, there is an organization called MEEST. It's spelled MEEST. This is a organization that allows sending goods between Canada and Ukraine. Today, they've announced that they will be sending a plane with humanitarian aid, and the shipping to Ukraine will be free. So, what Ukrainian army and people in the territorial defense need the most is a thermal visors so that they can see the enemy in the night. They need tactical knives, bulletproof vests, helmets. They need tourniquets. They need the medical medicine called CELOX, which is CELOX. CELOX, yes. That medicine is used to stop excessive blood loss. My professor for international law in National University Odessa Law Academy has joined the territorial defense. So he is on the front line in Odessa. And he just provides me with up-to-date information of what they're lacking. And if you find a way to deliver that medicine to Ukraine, that would be of huge help, because if you don't contribute to defending the army, you will contribute to saving life. And I think that is even more important in the context of war. So I think I've listed all of the things that I had in my mind, and I would appreciate if everyone can contribute in whatever way they can.
Excellent. Anna, last few closing remarks or comments in terms of what you think the best thing that people might be able to do that are here in Canada now. Oh, I think your mic maybe is muted.
I'll mention 2 things that are less concrete and sort of, less tangible, resulting in immediate impact and immediate help, but again, these are meaningful actions. So follow reliable, credible, trustworthy information sources so that you are adequately informed about what's happening in Ukraine, what Russia's position is. And so then you have an understanding yourself, and you might be in the position to educate others who might not have sort of the advantage of the benefit of reliable and accurate information sources. And so you might be, like, in your just social circles, in your conversations, you might be able to dispel any myths, any misunderstandings, or any confusions, or like conspiracy theories, anything like that.
Yeah.
And second, I would say that if you have sort of that ability to be vocal about what's happening, kind of raise your voice, speak to your members of parliament, keep asking them questions about what the government is going to do in terms of immigration measures for Ukraine, continued humanitarian aid, continuing assistance to the Ukrainian army, write letters to the editor, to major news sources in Canada, just for the main purpose of keeping it at the surface of everybody's mind. Yeah, like now, like here in Canada, if you just look at the news cycle, then like within the course of an hour on the mainstream news source, you will hear about Ukraine, you will hear about other countries. So for an average Canadian, person just consuming the news, it's kind of, all kind of changes very quickly from priority and for what gets our attention and our focus. And I'll just give you a very brief example, at which I was actually appalled today. So it was on CBC. It was an afternoon show in Edmonton. And so they were talking about Ukraine. They somehow managed to connect to people who are in Kyiv right now. And so they were describing their situations, those grim dungeon basements in which they were hiding from bombs. And then in the same show, like 10 minutes later, they kind of switched gears and they started talking about disastrous wedding experiences. How somebody ordered like a wedding cake and they ordered whatever colors and they had wrong colors on this wedding cake and it was hideous. And I have a lot of faith and a lot of generally good words to say about CBC, but here I thought, really, like people are like trying to save their lives and their families, and they go like they live in these horrible conditions right now. And how kind of in the same breath you talk about that, and then kind of you turn around and start talking about something relatively so trifling and frivolous, right? So to me, it was just an example how quickly here like we kind of switch our attention. And so the more kind of we speak about Ukraine, the more we speak to our politicians, we try to educate ourselves about what's actually happening, then the more it stays on everybody's mental radar, so to speak, and everybody's sort of like forefront of thinking, so that 10 minutes later we don't get distracted and diverted by a story about disastrous wedding cake.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you, Anna, for your insight. No, that's good. We've got all kinds of people. I think all of our pets and everything are anxious for us. You guys couldn't hear my dog Simba, who was scratching on my door. I'm hoping there's still paint on it. He wanted to come in, and he usually hops up on my lap and then goes and sits beside me here up on the desk. But unfortunately, the door wasn't open for him tonight. So thank you both for taking time. I know we went quite a long time, and when we do these live streams, they're always recorded. So anyone who is interested in in sharing this video that you're watching with others, there'll be a link, and you can pretty much see it right where you're watching it now. It's being broadcast not just to YouTube, but to Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, and so there's other places that this is going to be shown. And we covered a lot of ground today, but what we'll do is, Igor, I think what we'll do is we'll break this up and see if we can put some timestamps on it so that people can jump around to the sections that are of most use. So I'm taking the risk of posting this, Igor. I have no clue what this person is saying, but
I'll translate it. It basically says, "Glory to Ukraine. Kazakhstan is with us." And they say we could be in your spot. In your shoes. And thank you so much. Mark, just to add to what you were saying, I'll do my best. I'll use our app called Descript to break it down, and we can either release that as a podcast, or I will just use a voiceover translation in Ukrainian language, so that people in Ukraine who don't speak English can see this. So save this link, subscribe to this channel, and watch out for the next video.
Excellent. Thank you, Igor, and thank you, Anna. We'll let you take off, and thank you for everyone that has been here attending this live. And we'll sign off here with. Well, Igor, I was so close. I was going to play the anthem. I was going to play it. There's this one version that everybody loves, but I'm just waiting. If I did that, I know that YouTube would probably flag the video and put it down. So, well, I've got just this other different song, but we do have the flag. So we'll sign off with this. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.